Hello, and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer and artist and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field. If you've been listening to this podcast or are new to it, I thank you very much. I would also appreciate if you took a moment to follow it on whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts. Writers and Illustrators of the Future is one of the longest running writing competitions in the world, now celebrating 4 decades of providing a helping hand as initially conceived by L. Ron Hubbard. I also want to let you know that Writers of the Future volumes are available in bookstores throughout the US, Canada, the UK, South Africa, and Australia, as well as through all major online retailers. I'm here today at the Life, the Universe, and Everything Convention in Provo, Utah, in a very special year for LTUE, number 42. Anyone who has read Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy will understand the significance of the number 42, as it represents the meaning, actually all meaning, the meaning of life, the universe, and everything as determined by the fictional supercomputer Deep Thought. Now, my guest today is John Brown. John was a winner published in Writers of the Future Volume 13 with his story, Descent of Desire, under his pen name, Bo Griffin. I met up with him again last year at LTUE, and when I saw he would be back, I asked him to send me a book to read so I could catch up with him as a guest. His bio says he writes action-packed thrillers and epic fantasies with characters you want to cheer for. He currently lives with his wife and 4 daughters in the hinterlands of Utah, where one encounters much fresh air, many good-hearted ranchers, and the occasional wolf. Interestingly enough, he invites readers of his bio to break out in song if they feel so inclined. So I found a chap named Pete Seeger who beat me to it.
John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on.
And with that, welcome, John.
That's great. I think that's the best way that anybody sung that song to me.
So I guess to begin with, just a little about yourself. How'd your writing journey begin?
My writing journey began probably when I was a little kid, watching the Rankin Bass, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and the Santa Claus is Coming to Town, those claymation or whatever that is. That's when it started. And I wanted initially to be an animator. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And I saved my money up. I bought a camera. This is back in the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had a movie camera, a little 8mm movie camera, and I was going to build a animation stand. I had the instructions to build one. And my mother and my grandmother was a nut over the Apostle Paul. And so she was traveling all over the Middle East, going to all the different places he went. And I went with her after my 9th grade year. And my camera got caught in the conveyor belt at the Athens airport, and it crunched it. And that was the end of the animator dreams, right? But I think it started there.
Wow.
It started.
So that was your creative juices kicked into place. So
yeah. What
was it like? How old were you and, writing stories? Because obviously winning Writers of the Future, that was a short story competition.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think so. I thought I needed to be practical.
Mm-hmm.
And so later on when I was in college, it was my freshman year, and I was in an honors, it was the honors program, and I was still not, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I thought for a while I wanted to be a chemical engineer. My uncle was one of those. He worked on the space shuttle, and I thought, oh, that'll be great. But then I lost interest in that. I lost interest in a couple of other things. I was in this honors symposium, and they talked about Emily Dickinson and how she wanted to take the tops of people's heads off. And I was like, that is it. I want to take the tops of people's heads off. And so I decided I need to be a writer. I need to figure out how to do it. And I started an English degree at that time. I thought that's where I'd learn how to write. And there's nothing against English degrees, but they're not about necessarily learning how to write stories that are thrilling. And so it was a process. And I will say this, I finished my undergraduate degree, worked with a lot of great professors, never really wrote a story that I felt like was a story that I would go buy at a store, right?
Right.
And then Dave Wolverton, who had recently won, and maybe he was involved at that time. I'm not sure. I think maybe he was a coordinating judge, gave a workshop at BYU. And I was just like, yes, they're talking about plot and they're talking about exciting situations. And Dave was talking about submitting stories and making a living at this. And I think, that was the first thing, Rankin and Bass. And then Dave's workshop, which I later came to learn was kind of a version of the workshop that we did at the Writers of the Future. That's the thing that got me going again.
Oh, good.
I think that's pretty good.
Well,
fair.
That works for me.
Yeah.
So science fiction and fantasy, and you had your story. I tried to get through it before starting this. When I finished your book, after the first day here at this conference, I finally, I got the end of that one there. But the Scent of Desire was also fantasy, because I got enough to, they're out in the swamp area, and so it was definitely seemed to be more of a darker fantasy type of a scent to it.
Yeah.
So you start off on the dark fantasy side, or because definitely what we're going to talk about isn't well, maybe we'll get to be dark fantasy. So far, it's just been a really good adventure story with fantasy in it.
Yeah. Well, so that one, I didn't think of it as dark fantasy. What had happened is I had read Laura Esquivel's Like Water for Chocolate, Magic Realism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was part of the inspiration, because that
answers that question. That makes sense then.
Yeah, terrific book.
Yeah.
And then there was a guy I was living in Spanish Fork, Utah at the time, and there was this guy. He wasn't exactly homeless, but he seemed to be homeless. He was walking around. He was a big tall guy, had a big red beard. He had this, I don't know what it is. It's like an overall, a lined, warm overall. He's got boots on, right? I don't think it's Carhartt uniform, like somebody that you'd see a mechanic wearing, or somebody like that, somebody that's working outdoors. And I saw him and I thought, I need to give this guy a ride. He's out here. I see him around. He's going somewhere. Let me give him a ride. So I stopped. I gave him a ride. His name was Ronald Wolf. And he had an interesting story. He was living in the shed that was in back of this bicycle shop. The bicycle owner was letting him live. I mean, it was so you take Like Water for Chocolate, and you take Ronald Wolf, and The Scent of Desire is what comes forth. Yeah. And I wasn't thinking of a certain genre, and I want to write. I knew I loved fantasy, right? That was part of it. But this is just what it was, and it was exciting. And
that's interesting, because one of the things that you do in the Writers of the Future workshop is you go out and meet a stranger.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Everybody's got a story. You don't realize it until you actually talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And it's funny, because even one of the articles that Hubbard wrote is on search for research, how people always see it's the other side of the mountain where there's the good storyline. And then someone else comes into your town and they see this, the local corner store, and they see the old people, they're standing there, and they write a best-selling book. It's like, how'd they do that? You lose perspective that the story's right in front of you, or can be.
Yeah. Yeah. There are so many good stories like that. Even in the little town, I live now in a little town. It's at the south of this lake, and there are probably 250 people there, if you count some of the cows. But there are so many good stories. You could write dozens of novels, based on the people that are there. Yeah,
I believe you.
Sure.
It totally makes sense. People have no idea how interesting people really are if they bother to walk out of their shell for a little bit and just talk and see. Hi, my name's John. What's your name? I'm John too. Wow.
And that's interesting, because that was one of the things in the workshop that we did. It was another one of the things that we did with Orson Card, and I'm not gonna. I don't know, but I think Orson Card's workshop at the boot camp that I attended with him, there were some definite influences there, I believe. From Writers of the Future, but that was part of what we did there, and I think that's one of the things that when I was in my undergraduate, working with these wonderful people, I have nothing against them, right? But it was one of the great things about that practice is you're going outside of yourself to find something outside of yourself that's new and exciting. And it's like a formalized way of going and doing that. and you bring this new material in, and it makes the stories I've found better. So
Yeah.
whether that's research, whether that's talking to somebody, whatever that is, I think that's just terrific.
Which
Yeah.
is awesome. Yeah. So you found about Rise of the Future through Dave at BYU.
I think I'm must have.
Yeah.
I don't
He was a
remember
winner in volume 3.
Yeah.
And you were volume 13. Is that
Yeah.
what we said?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so yeah, it could have been that. And he was the first of our judges that taught there. I don't know if Scott Card ever taught at BYU. I've had conflicting reports on that. And then Brandon Sanderson picked up and I guest spoke at one of his classes several years ago when I asked him after the class, will you be a judge? And he said, yes, and he told the story how he used to enter the contest too. Okay. So then any other highlights that you remember from that workshop week in
Cocoa
Rise of the
Beach?
Future?
Oh my gosh. So here's a funny one. So, okay. So first of all, I mean, as a new author, who would expect that not only do you get paid for the contest and you get paid for the publication, but they're going to fly you out to a week-long workshop, and we go to Cocoa Beach, Florida, and they take us to a space shuttle lunch. So here's the funny, I'm with another guy, another one of the contestants, and they've got these bleachers. Space shuttle is miles away. When it launched,
It was 1 mile away.
Was it only 1 mile away?
1 mile away.
Okay, so when it launched, boy, you could feel
we were the closest civilians.
right?
Yeah.
So that was amazing. Well, they had all these people walking around with mosquito spray, and I had shorts on, so of course I was lathered up. Right, I was covered in mosquito spray. My friend had some dress slacks on. He did not take the mosquito spray, and the material was so thin that they went through, and his rear end was just peppered with mosquito bites. So the rest of the workshop, I would see him over there just squirming in the chair waiting for the workshop. So that's definitely a good memory. Another good memory is, I wrote this story and I had one direction I was going to go with it, but I went a different direction. And when we got down to the feedback part, Algis Budris was one of the judges there and one of the instructors. And he said something to me that was, I don't want to say devastating, but disappointing, but it was a great learning experience. And he said, so he read my story, and his feedback was, it lacks drama. It lacks drama. And at the time, I had absolutely no idea what that meant. I had no idea. And I was like, crap, I don't even know what I lack, but it was a good thing, because then, okay, what is drama? How do you inject the stories with drama? What is that, etc. So and there were all sorts of other things. Meeting the other authors, Dave Wolverton, the beach, raining, people. There were people there that was just so helpful and kind.
Jack Williamson was a grandmaster of science fiction. He'd been writing since, I think, 1927.
Yeah.
And writing about man going into space, but he'd never seen a space launch. He was like in his 80s there, and he was there.
And when he was at that one.
Yeah, he was at that one. And he was like a little kid. He was like so excited, never having seen a real life space launch, and he'd been writing about it for 60 years and had never seen one. You had Jerry Purnell and Larry Niven and these Anne McCaffrey, these major judges there out there on the bleachers watching this stuff. And all of them were like little kids, And the thing that you don't realize is that you're spoiled watching these launches on television, because they slow it down, and they have a lot of different angles. So like that launch will last for like 5-10 minutes, but in real life, 45 seconds, you barely see a pinpoint, but when you have that countdown, 10, 9, it's for real. You're out there, and the speakers are going, and then the rumble, and then there's that lag, the lag of sound. You got the sight, and you got the lag of sound, and then, like you said, it hits you just like your whole body's like vibrating.
You don't get that on TV. You don't get the thunder vibrating through your body.
Just like that, and that's a mile away. It's just amazing how much force. But we were the closest civilians at that launch.
With all the civilians and the mosquitoes.
On the mosquitoes. And they had the signs posted, stay away from the sides there, because there were all the alligators and snakes.
So
posted for alligators.
A little bit of danger, which is good, right? A little bit of drama. I will also say Tim Powers was there.
Yep.
And he was very positive. He was just super positive. So it was just a terrific experience. I said this in the, they had us at the time, and I don't know if they still do it, but the winners come up and they make a little acceptance
Yeah,
speech or say
still
a
do
few
that.
words. And I said at the time, and I still believe it, this is, I can't imagine a better way to break in with short stories into the market, and start your career than this. I mean, it was like, I mean, okay, I sell to Asimov's. Okay, I gotta, but I sell here, and it's like a hoopla, right? It's
Yeah.
just like, yeah, you made it. It was
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah.
And that's something that L. Ron Hubbard made a big point of, and then 40 years later that he's still doing it. He put that in as part of his legacy to continue on this contest into perpetuity.
Yeah.
So it's going on and on. And the number of people that have had their start. And when I saw you last year and then I looked up your portfolio, I went, wow, I hadn't tracked to see how much, you'd written. I forget what it was. I met another author last night who was in winner volume 12. He now is doing screenplays and something, so he hasn't written other novels, but it's amazing. Just nearly between both contests, I have nearly 1,000 winners now.
Yeah.
Out there all around the world that, Mr. Hubbard with his contest has helped, which has been, truly an amazing thing.
Yeah, it is. It's terrific.
So now, like I said, I went back and I looked and saw you've written a lot of books, and so you obviously transitioned to novels.
Mhm.
So how did that work then? So once you won the contest and you had your newfound, you had your new quest to find out what Algis Budrus really meant.
Yeah.
So getting that established, how did that go then to writing your books?
Yeah. Well, so interesting. So won the contest, kept trying to write stories and submit them. And I became blocked for 5 years, right? Something like this happens. You're like, yes, I'm on my way, but that didn't happen for me. I became blocked. I tried to write some stories. I tried to finish some. And after 4 or 5 years of writing, then you think, well, I don't know what, and I didn't know what I was doing, right? I was just trying to do the best I could. So maybe I'm a one-trick pony. Maybe I just don't have what it takes. Maybe I don't know I don't have the DNA. I don't have the personality type, whatever it is. God didn't bless me, whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
You begin thinking this. So Orson Card was doing his boot camps, and we had some tax return money. And I turned to my excellent wife. Yeah, I can't believe she said yes. And instead of taking the kids to Disney World, I was living in Ohio at the time. I said, honey, I let me just try this. And if it doesn't work, then I'll sell the books. I'll get rid of the manuscripts, and I won't look back. Okay. But let me just try this. And she said, okay, go. So I flew back out this year. He was doing it in Utah. And I took this boot camp with Orson Card. And I get there and we have the first 2 days, and then we're supposed to write a short story. And we did the research thing.
Yeah.
And one of his things, and I think this was part of Hubbard's, I can't remember,
Yeah,
but Card's was go research something that you think is boring. Because if you think it's boring, it means you don't know enough about it, and you're going to find all sorts of interesting things about it. And I thought, okay, I got to the library and I was like, I'm just bored by American Indians, right? Okay, that's what I'm going to research. I get in. I started researching it. Holy schnitzel, right? It was just amazing the things that I was finding about American, how did I not know this? And I focused on the Iroquois, had all these great ideas, didn't have a story. So we're supposed to write a story on Wednesday, turn it in. Didn't have a story on Wednesday, right? Didn't have a story Wednesday night. Thursday morning, I get up early, didn't have a story. Thursday afternoon, I take all my lunch. I'm trying to figure out what the story might be. I don't have it. Thursday night, I don't have a story. And I thought, well, I guess this is it. This is the end of it, right? I was an actual one-trick pony, and I'm never going to write anything again. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have that essential element, that vitamin that you need to do this. And I went to a Golden Corral, this buffet place, and there I was with my chicken and mashed potatoes, just super sad. And
they got good cinnamon rolls too.
I don't remember. I just remember the chicken and mashed potato. And I thought, okay, I'll just try one more thing. I tried that thing. The lights turned on. The music started playing. The story just rolled out in front of me like a like a red carpet, just boom, 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 boom. That's your story. And I ran out of there. There was another guy in the line, and I was like, I've got it, right? And I ran down to my hotel, wrote all the rest of that night, wrote Friday, turned it in on Saturday morning. And, most of the writers there loved it. Orson Card, as generous as he said, the issues are paint spots on a palace. And I took that story and I submitted it. It sold again, went into a best of the year anthology, right? Has been published multiple times. And what happened is I started to discover just some basic concepts about how stories work and about creativity and that kind of stuff. That's all. It wasn't that I didn't have the DNA or I didn't have, the gift or whatever. I just didn't understand how it worked. And suddenly those doors started to open and I went from there. And then I thought, well, I got to do novels because novels where the action's at. And so I switched over, finished a novel, got an agent, Tor Books picked it up in a 3-book deal, and then that's just where we've gone from there. So for folks that are new writers, in fact, I just did a session today where the number one thing that kills more writers' dreams than anything else, right? The number one thing is the writer themselves. It's the writer themselves and the conclusions they draw about themselves, about the writing process, about how this stuff works, right? That's just absolutely false. And it leads them to these statements of, well, I can't do it. I don't have what it takes. I stink. I'll never be like this person. I'll never be able to learn it. I've been doing this a long time, and I've seen lots of writers come and lots of writers go. And that's the thing that I think takes most writers out of this game. It's just misunderstanding it, not knowing the principles. Yeah. So anyway, so that's how I got to novels. And that's the path that I had.
That's good. Yeah. I've good friends with Tom Doherty, who was the publisher of Tor.
Yeah.
He's now the CEO. He's stepped back quite a bit because he's like 87 now, but he still has to keep his hand in the piles going through stuff like that.
Right.
With Tor Books. That's interesting because Scott Card, Tim Powers, and Dave Wolverton, we created a free online writing workshop for Writers of the Future to address some of these points that you just talked about. You had to figure out yourself of how to start a story, how to create suspense, how to do drama, how to do narration and versus, people talking, the basic stuff like that, how to conclude a story, how to have the denouement, all those different pieces, individual videos that we recorded them doing it. Okay, I'll do this one. Okay, I'll do that one.
Yeah.
So 12 videos of them, plus 10 of the Owen Hubbard essays. And if a person does all the drills, they can end up with that free online workshop with a short story. And one of our winners this year, David Hankins in volume 39, he was like, what do I do? I don't know. He just kept on missing it. And so he said, okay, I'll just do this course and do what it says. Yeah. So he submitted it and he got an honorable mention. No more so he said, oh, okay. So then I get
that's how to do it.
I get what's happening here. Yeah. So that's really good on that. Now, when I asked you what would be a good first book to read, so you sent me the Drovers book 1, Prey. So you described it as fantasy, but I saw it as fantasy. Your description is rollicking action and adventure. So it is that too, so I look at it from the fantasy side, you're looking at it from the action and adventure side. How did you decide, go with that decision that that's what action adventure, at least that's what it says in the description, over fantasy, or what is it, a bigger readership base?
Well, no, because I think if you look at the headline, right, it's Prey, the Drovers, an epic fantasy adventure. So I set the genre up there in the listings, and then down below, what I want them to understand is, it's adventure. I like adventure, and so just no reader, if you get to the bottom of that description, that this is the kind of story you're going to get.
Okay, good.
But yeah, it's definitely fantasy.
All right, and it's definitely a coming of age story.
Yeah.
So now you got the principal character there, Farron. That's how you pronounce it, right? Farron?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there's several other, because there's the 5 boys that are there, and 3 of them are the main ones that you get to know. You got Farron, and then you've got, what's his name, Windwallum. Yeah, Windwallum. And then his antagonist, which
Caswell.
Yeah, Caswell, and then they're fighting the Korog, and so how much of that? I mean, it's a real fun story, but how much of it is, more to it, like you're trying to convey something else? Because there's some definite underlining philosophies that resound throughout this story.
Yeah.
When Farron really wants to. Well, anyway, so describe that first of all, like how you came up with that, because I really enjoyed it, and the bummer for me, I'm not reading my next book for my next guest, so it's really hard for me to get one book. But I'm so like, what happens? Because of course you do
Right.
your cliffhanger at the end of book one, and go like, you're going, okay, great, and then like, he just did it. I saw it coming, but I was hoping, okay, because I
Yeah.
count the pages in the ebook. Okay, good, I got another this many, so it's getting close. Is there going to be another? No, that was it. And he's going, okay, so what will happen? Where do they go to this? What happens when they hit the blight?
Yeah. So there's more. I'm working on the 4th one, and then that will finish this cycle, and then I'll move on to a different one. We might come back to it. So, yeah.
So anyway, so is there some basic philosophy, because you've got Farron is definitely getting the crap beat out of him by these bullies, and he's definitely at the time at the start of the story, he's this little gangly little kid, and doesn't have enough food, so he has no energy level because he just doesn't eat anything.
Yeah.
So where'd this guy come from?
Well, the story. So I was an advisor to a young men's group. So that was with my church community. So these are guys 12 to 14. Okay.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? I want to write a story for these guys. Now, whether I succeeded with that, my wife is a language arts teacher for that same age group, right? And those that get into it seem to like the book. But I thought, you know what?
I'm long out of that age group, but
yeah. And I'm out of that age group too. And I thought, well, I don't want to just focus on those guys, but I want to write a story about these guys. And I think it's a fun age, and there are a lot of challenges and, life experiences that I think are important at that time. I wanted to write a story to them that was full of excitement, but there might also be some stuff in there about, I'm not trying to do man lore, but there's stuff in there about being a man.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know what I'm saying?
I do. That's what we're going to talk about.
That's what coming of age is about, right?
Yeah.
I'm becoming a woman. I'm becoming a man. And there are some things that you've got to learn in order to become a man or become a woman. And so I took, when I was a kid, I loved John Wayne's The Cowboys. That would, this is back in the day when there wasn't VHS and all those other things. And so John Wayne's The Cowboys would come on once a year, and boy, you had to watch it. Yeah. And so
I was there with How the West Was Won, the son of KV Elder, Rio Bravo, because I looked to see, all of a sudden when I saw that, and I went, I started remembering all these things here. Rio Bravo, the Alamo, and The Longest Day. Those are just like, John Wayne was the dude.
He was. The 70s, it was awesome. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to take that, because I loved it, and it's got a good and I'm going to put it in an epic fantasy world. Right. So the drovers, they're driving cattle, right?
Yeah.
But there's a mage queen, and there's a war coming, and there's magic, and there's creatures and all that kind of stuff. And so that was kind of the inspiration, I think, for that book. I think
so it's a Western.
It's a Western. It is.
Yeah.
It's a Western.
No, reason because it's got that action, that is that. They don't have the guns. They've got their spears that they learn how to make, and there they are in bare feet. They're like, they really are the poor of the poor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I there's one other thing that I love. I love the whole guy, the going to war, boot camp, learning how to fight. That stuff just has always appealed to me ever since I was a kid. I remember in 2nd grade, I was drawing army man stick figures and, people out fighting. And so that's in here, right? That's in here. That's part of this. That's the whole thing with spears. They're guards, and this drover has nobody else to help him. He's got to get these cattle into the main city for the Mage Queen, and so they're learning stuff from this guy who's an old, retired military, crusty old guy. And
you still don't know who he is yet. It's all been
not yet.
At least for me, right now in volume 1, like, who is that guy?
Yeah,
he's obviously somebody, and the cook quote unquote, is obviously somebody there, and you get a little bit of stuff, but then as soon as they say it, then they joke about it or deny anything further from it, but they see these tattoos. Well, that has to be this. Well, I cooked for them, so you don't know this stuff, but they definitely are able to teach these boys how to fight, and they know all the things about it and what to do and what's important and what's not important.
Yeah.
But it's that, you've got the Windwallum because Farron gets bullied quite a bit by Coswell, and then his brothers or his friends back at home before he left, how they're, hitting and beating him, doing stuff to like bully him. How much did that fit? Because it was very obviously, Windwallum was coaching him to not get suckered into the, you hit me, I'm gonna hit you. I mean, he did do the one thing where he dumped the cow dung around, so that was a little bit of, okay, good. He's getting his moxie built up there a bit.
Yeah.
But his inclination to want to strike back in physical violence, you coached him away from that, through your storytelling. So how much of that is based upon experience, based upon helping to coach the kids to what does it mean to be a man versus a bully or whatever?
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't have anything explicit that I was thinking with that. So, with stories, there are, I guess, structures or things that you have deep down, and those will manifest out. So maybe that's it. I didn't have an explicit, I don't remember. Now, maybe I did at the time, but I don't remember having any explicit message or anything with that. It was just how I figured those two would react.
Yeah,
and
there's a common reaction too that I've seen in stories, like he would go and attack, and then it would push back on him. Then you realize, oh, that wasn't the right thing to do. Having succumb to his desires to get even, and then finding that wasn't the right recourse, for the thing. So Windwallum circumvented that, and he grew with that, and towards the end of that final fight scene, what he was able to do. And then you saw the bully like, well, I was just taking orders, so I stayed away from everything. And and I still don't know. He says, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And then the story ends. So I don't know what that discussion is going to be yet, that they're going to have with him, because he's obviously a coward.
Yeah.
Or cowardly at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, Now, the next book, Farron is who Farron is, right?
Yeah.
And also
He's the main protagonist.
I'll tell you, he is the main protagonist. I'll tell you this, I grew up, and it's interesting. My daughters had to read Old Man and the Sea with Ernest Hemingway in high school. My wife doesn't like that. I love that. And it reminds me more of anything else. It reminds me of my father and my grandfather. When I was growing up, they were both boxers. They boxed at the college level. They were boxers, right? And in their stories, they were telling me, you need to be a man, right? You stand up. If you get knocked, I remember one about my Uncle Bert. He was boxing a Golden Gloves boxer, and he got knocked down, and the Golden Gloves boxer, I don't know if this story is true or not, if it grew in the telling, but he said to him, Brown, stay down, right? But my Uncle Bert got back up, and he got knocked down again. He's just, stay down, Brown. And he got back up again. Well, the end of the fight is Brown won, right? My Uncle Bert won the fight. And so I would get these stories, and I saw that same thing in Ernest Hemingway, at least in The Old Man and the Sea. He was telling this story that was like, this is exciting to me. And I don't know that he had a message so much as just, this is what I think it is to be a man. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is, if you're in this kind of situation, this is what you do. And so I'm sure some of that's coming out. That's just what I grew up with. You gotta stand up on your own 2 feet, no matter what happens. Maybe you got to be clever about it. Maybe you got to go straight at him. But I don't know. This is interesting, John. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Plumbing the depths of my psyche here.
That's one of the things I like about reading a book, is then I have my own. I wonder if, and what about that?
Yeah.
Now, one thing too is with your book here, and this gets into you're writing fantasy here.
Yeah.
But there's a setting that added a realism to, which made it easier for me to get involved and accept your story. You had a feudal lord system where the reigning lord must be paid, and then you could, the kid would have to be given up if sold into servitude if they didn't have the money to pay for them. The way the system worked in the town communities. And I definitely know at that time, a person who lives in community never goes, a mile outside of where he was born, a lot of those things there. So when you have somebody that goes beyond that, they're the big travelers. But how much research did you get? Because there was that reality that I had with your setting that made it easier to okay, it made the people more real to me because of the environment that you put them in that seemed to me oh yeah, that's a realistic setting.
Yeah, I think it's you can't enter into, so these stories that we tell, what we're doing is we're guiding the reader on a certain emotional experience. It's just like a roller coaster.
Right.
I've got to do that. I can't do that if you don't believe. If I can't transport you and get enough details right that you feel like you're there and then it makes sense, then I'm not going to be able to give you the experience I want to give you. So I am really drawn to details like that, like the cheese making vessels and slings and everything else. And I'll do all the research I need to, talk to people that do it, go try it myself to make sure I get the details and I can pepper those in so that it transports people and helps them feel, this is real. I can trust him now. And now I can just see what's going to happen with the characters,
Yeah.
So I think that's an important part of fiction writing.
It is. And so how do you do your research? Because that's something that people are quite often interested in. So how does this author do the research versus that author? So how do you do your research?
So if I can go experience it, I will. Right. For example, when I first moved to where we are, this big ranching community, they had every year the Black Gold Testicle Festival. Right now, most people or some people will be like, no, thank you. But as a writer, it's like, well, heck yeah, let's go experience that, see what they taste like. Right. And so I'm not going to tell you what they taste like. It's not like chicken. It's not like chicken. It's not like chicken. It has a texture and taste something else. I thought they were delicious,
Mine oysters is the other one for sheep and goats.
There you go.
Yeah.
So if I can go experience something, I will. So there are places I've traveled to. I want to get firsthand, like for example, in my novel, Awful Intent. So I do these fantasies, but I've also got a series of action thrillers, kind of Lee Child, Robert Craze type stories. And one of them was set in southern Utah in a little town called Kanab. So I went there. And I went and looked around, and here's one of these interesting telling details that I wouldn't have gotten if I hadn't gone. You know how in the winter, well, maybe not, you're down in Hollywood, but in the winter, in some places, the snow will blow up onto the door, onto the doorstep. And well, it wasn't snow. It was the red sand, right? The red sand that would blow. So you'll get details like this. Now, in that story as well, I was looking around and I'll do research of the setting and then I'll say, well, what are some cool things, fun things that could happen in this setting? In that setting for Awful Intent, down in southern Utah, there's all sorts of flash floods all the time. Now, okay, it's going to be hard to time it and, find that, but I was able to find online a guy who's a flash flood chaser, and I watched a number of his videos, and then I called him up, right? I called him up, I talked to him, I did it, an interview with him. So I've talked so I'll start off with, I want to experience it as much as I can, do it. I want to talk to people who have done it. And then if I have to read juvenile books and start there and then get up or watch other videos, I'll do that. For example, in that same one, the sheriff is a female. She's a female cop. And I wanted to know, well, what's it like? So I read a book about it. And then I went, and the nearest big city, I went and was introduced to an officer there, and she's been in the force for a long time. And so I had questions, and we talked and had a good conversation about what it's like to be a female cop. And so that's how I do my research. I want to immerse myself as much as I can in these worlds. And so that's just what I do.
Definitely made it. Like I said, I'm sorry because I've got my next books now that I've got to read, getting ready for the next one. But this is in a stack of when I get a window to be able to read the next one. What happens? Because I like your writing style. It's very flowing. It's very easy. I like stories that don't have 15 layers.
Mhm.
I don't have the attention span nor the time to be able to get through what kind of a novel that's going to represent. So
Right.
and these epics will get into that type of stuff, like storylines that are interweaving constantly, and you're going on, then 400 pages later, the next one bubbles back up again. So you've got enough going on in there that really pulls it along, and it made it really fast reading, but engaging. And you get some of the things where your pulse is going, and on that final fight scene in that one there, it was like, oh no, because I had to get to sleep, because I was only going to get 6 hours of sleep, but I had to, because I had a panel and be ready for the whole things, for the
Right.
convention starting. So I got to stop now. And then in between panels, I was there. I was finishing it, to be ready for today. But that's the kind of story I like. I like the
Oh, good.
stories that I'm just very engaged, and because it was a real setting that you had there, and you could. I mean, it's real to me. Like, behind the herd, you're going to have the droppings, the cow. You have to
Yep.
watch out for them, and you're going to have all the dust.
Yep.
That's for real,
Yeah.
So it's somebody who's actually seen that. The way you talked about it, I could actually see the cow, being pulled along, and then it was just, it was a very realistic thing.
These telling details, if you go into it, you're going to notice things that you don't expect.
Yeah.
The unexpected detail, that's the detail I want to put into my thing, right?
Yeah.
That's the detail I want. I will say it's interesting that you picked up on this. So when I was looking at this, I wanted to write an epic fantasy series. I had just, my family, me and my 4 daughters and my wife, we had watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, that cartoon series.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? That's a epic story. They just told it in a bunch of small little episodes. And I thought, I'm going to do that with this one. It's, I'm going to do that. I'm going to try that. We're going to try to do an epic arc. And the arc is epic, right? We only get through the beginning of it in these first 4, but I want to try that with that type of a thing, but just for the reason that you said. So
Yeah.
that's interesting that you picked up on that.
Yeah, because I can see there's more stuff coming, because you allude to things, but it's not there that my attention gets fixated on.
Yeah.
So I know that you're going into the blight. It looks like they're going into the blight, so what does that present? So you've got some mystery around it, and you've got these bad dudes that are going to come in. They've landed in the store, and so they can't get the help that they need, because these bad dudes are going to be there. So it looks like you're going to run into the bad dudes at some point, and you need these big burly warriors to fight, but all you got these 5 boys that you got to
That's
train
right.
them up.
That's right.
And you got them versus the dark mages, or whatever, the guys that aren't loyal to any particular sovereign. So they're doing their own thing with their, black magic type stuff. So you got this happening, and it's like, I can see us coming in there. That would be way too much for me to have gotten into on book 1. But what I had on book 1 was enough, like, okay, good. It sets the story. I know the characters. I see that there's some future there, but I've been satisfied with the first book, and not feel like I don't have to read another 1,000 pages in order to be able to get it all, to understand what just happened.
To have a full story arc.
Yeah.
A satisfying meal, right?
Yeah.
I want to give you a satisfying ride. You got it. So that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. So that's what it was. And that was really good. But I can see I'm going to get a next course.
Yeah.
But I'm good for right now. So I can read my next book for my next podcast, and then come back to you.
That's right.
So now on your, you acknowledge Lilia Brown, is that how you pronounce it?
Mm-hmm.
Lilia Brown, for helping you along with your idea of a magic system based on goblin farts. Can you please explain that?
So that's a little joke between her and me. So, okay, it's an epic fantasy story. I need to come up with a magic system.
Sure.
Right. And for whatever reason, it was just kicking my butt. And I was having a difficult time finding one that I liked. And so one day, I was traveling in the car with the girls. We were coming back from somewhere. They were involved in sports. And I was like, help me out. What would be a good magic system? And Lilia was talking about that. And I think, we laughed.
That's your daughter?
Lilia is my daughter. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, she's one of my daughters.
Yeah.
So we all laughed, had a good chuckle about that. But And this is part of brainstorming. You got to have fun. You got to be loose. Can't be uptight. If you get a dumb idea, you just have to roll with it and have fun with it. And because of that, in that drive, hey, I actually, it helped me and led me to some of the magic that I wanted to have in this system. So thank you, Lilia.
Yeah, for sure.
the-
That was just like, what?
for-
I don't see any farts in there.
That's right.
So, okay, let's talk about magic systems, because that's, people want to do the fantasy,
Yeah.
and there's different philosophies on it. You got Brandon does his fantasy, you've got Tolkien does his fantasy,
Yep.
and different fantasies I've read. There's high fantasy, low fantasy. There's this stuff that's like outrageous. Like, nah, it can't be right. Catherine Kurtz with her Durini series, she'll be coming out by the way this year to the Rise of Future event with her fantasy that she does. So how did you arrive at your fantasy, and what's like the laws that you're applying to it so that it doesn't get outrageous where they just kind of go snap their finger and all of a sudden the dragon slayer appears, or here's my sword, snap, here's my magic spear.
So, okay, so let's just go back to story.
Yeah.
One of the key aspects, the core aspects of the ride that we're giving to the reader is we want to trigger hopes and fears in the reader for the character. We want them to be uncertain. We want them on pins and needles, right? Will they get what I want? Or I'm fearing that they're going to get this bad thing. We want to build that to a sharp point, and then we want to deliver the answer to the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like core to the story experience. Okay, so now I'm going to interject magic. Well, what is magic? Magic is just a cool way of getting something done, pretty much, right? I need a light. Okay, I can have a flashlight, or Gandalf can go and get this little piece of rock to light our way, right? Or I can scale a castle wall, or I can have some power that allows me to jump like a flea to the top of the castle wall, right? So magic is a cool way to get things done. Now, it can also be ambiance. We can have ambiance type stuff. But going to your question, it's a cool way to get things done. Well, the magic has to have limitations, because if it doesn't have limitations, then I'm not going to be wondering what's going to happen. I won't have hopes and fears. I'll just know. That ruins the reader effect. Right. So when I develop a magic system, I always have to figure out what are some limitations to the magic. Where does, it's limited in duration, it's limited in the scope, it's limited in size, it's limited in some way. It's got to be limited. Or some card had his way of limited. He called it a cost. And so a lot of people, when they were looking at magic, looking at it that way, they would have a fuel source, and then the fuel source would burn out. I don't care which way it is. You've got to have a limit. And so that's one of the things that I look at with magic systems. And so in my magic system, there is a definite limit. There's a definite limit on, how big of an effect you can have. And I'm thinking always of the reader. I want them to have this terrific ride. Mm-hmm. There's got to be uncertainty about the outcome. They can't be uncertain if these guys get overpowered. And with fantasy as well, part of the delight, part of the enjoyment that we're giving the reader is this slow exploration, the learning of what's going on, the lore, the exploration of the lore. How do you really do it? So I don't, in this series at least, I wanted to dole this out slowly.
Right.
Let people enjoy the meal, and also make sure that there's always a limit to that magic. Do cool stuff, but always have a limit.
I get it. Good.
Yeah.
Now, have you read any of Owen Hubbard's stories?
I've read the one that I read, and this is back in high school, was Battlefield Earth. Loved it.
Yeah, it's interesting that, that's one that's just been read over and over and over again by so many guests that I've interviewed. And it's funny how several of them said that's how they, like Brandon Sanderson, that's how he learned plot and pacing, mm-hmm. Just that. Kevin Anderson's was same thing. Like, he would get tired reading it because he's like, because it was like, because there's so much action in there. Yeah. He went from one to the next, and it's I've had various guests that write the action adventure, the near future sci-fi, long-term sci-fi. That book has been just amazing. And one of the last people I interviewed, Craig Martell, he was one of the guys that helped create the 20 books to 50K.
Yeah.
what he really liked about it a lot was the all the different genres that were in that wrapped in one book, because it was the Western, and it was science fiction, and it was the economics that was in there, the finance. It started off low, and then it became a local sci-fi, and then it went to intergalactic, and all these things there, which he really liked about it, but just kept on going on and expanding, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Anything in particular that you remember from that?
Well, so this is when I read it. It was my
This is Elwin Hubbard's Battlefield Earth?
Battlefield Earth. I read it my senior year, and I was in an AP English class. So we were reading things like Thomas Hardy, right? Heart of Darkness, those kind of stories. And then I go to the store, I see that big fat thing there, and the cover, whatever it was, I was like, I'm going to read this. So all of my friends just devoured the book. We loved it. So for me, now, it was back then, I wasn't thinking about being an author then, so I wouldn't be looking at it from an author's eyes, but I do know that the action, that pacing, right? That action, and I love action, right? That is, none of us could put it down. All of it, we would hand it to the next guy, and then it was this, oh, you got to that part? Oh, man, that's awesome. We would talk about it. So I loved it. And at the time, and this, even when I got out to the workshop, I was like, can we take a little excursion here on education theory?
Yeah.
So my wife is a language arts teacher, right? 7th and 8th grade. And what we have found is that the administration doesn't really understand what's required if you want to teach somebody how to write. If you want to teach them how to write, they've got to write. And as you and I just talked about, writing it's not something that can be graded by a computer, because whether or not you're succeeding in your communication and taking people on a ride or persuading them or whatever, it depends on the person that's reading it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not only do you have to write, but you've got to have somebody reading it. Okay. So they don't give any of these teachers time enough to do that. So these kids don't get to really learn how to write. Well, they do something else because of time constraints, and it has to do with reading. And the thing is that they do is this, because these language arts teachers need smaller classes and more time. If they want them to allow them to learn, the students to learn how to write and do these other things. Well, they do this. They say, we're going to read this book together, Heart of Darkness, Tess of the Duberville, whatever it might be, right? We're going to read this together. And in many classes, we're going to take 3 months to do this. And then you're going to write a report about it, and we're going to try to decode it. It isn't a book for the experience. We're going to try to decode it. And so what happens with these kids is that they go through middle school and they go through high school, and they come to believe, many of them, I believe, that literature is this exercise of writing in symbols, and then you're hunting for symbols and you're trying to decode the true meaning of the book. That isn't what it was. Battlefield Earth, right, was not that. Now, maybe there's meaning, maybe there's something you could do with that. Battlefield Earth was pure adrenaline, awesome experience, especially for a teenage boy, right? I mean, I still remember the scene with him dragging, well, I don't want to ruin it for him, but dragging the nukes out, right? Yeah. It was just like, yes, right? I mean, this is just pure experience. And so for me, there is merit to reading the classics and that kind of stuff. And there is merit to doing those other things. But I like what my wife is doing now with her kids. And I think it's too bad that they don't do more of this, which is say, read anything. Your grade is how many words you read based on your reading ability. That's your grade. And in that type of world, Battlefield Earth would be one of those books that would be read over and over and over and over and over and over and over again in school, because it's so thrilling. And when that happens, not only does a student become better at reading, right, because they've read all these words, they've gone through the process, they also start to identify themselves as a reader. I am a reader. I'm somebody that enjoys reading. So I look back at that AP English class. It was awesome, but I wish Battlefield Earth or something like that had been on the curriculum. I gave it to my teacher. We all gave it to her. We're like, you have to read this book. She's like, huh. So it wasn't her favorite book, but that's okay. It was our favorite book. So yeah, I had a great time with Battlefield Earth. It was a terrific story.
Yeah, Elwin Hubbard was an amazing storyteller, and it made him one of the most qualified to have created this contest, Rise of the Future, because he himself was one of the masters of the golden age of science fiction. But it wasn't just science fiction. He also was a top-selling Western author, adventure author, military fiction. He accepted a challenge from, that you can't write romance, so he went and picked up a different pen name and wrote romance and sold that.
Those old guys, those guys back in the day, I have a lot of admiration because they did do that. They wrote a lot, and they wrote in a lot of different genres. Yeah, yeah.
You had to if you're going to survive, and it was right after World War I. The Depression was there. They had the plague. Half people of America was out of work. The other half were like, "What am I going to do?" So you had to do something. If you didn't write, you didn't eat. There wasn't like, in some communities they had the ability to help the poor, to get them back on their feet, but they didn't make a profession of being poor,
right?
And so.
So I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So I love Battlefield Earth.
Okay.
What's the next book of Hubbard's that I should read? And I love action. I love adventure. Doesn't matter if it's epic fantasy, science fiction, pirates, whatever it is. Where would you?
Okay.
Where
So
would
there's
you direct
one.
me?
There's one. It's called Typewriter in the Sky, and it's recursive science fiction. It's science fiction about itself. It's several of our judges. That's been their favorite book. William Tenn. He taught that in his creative writing class at University of Maryland or something like that.
Okay.
Because that one there, it's the author is Horace Hackett. So he's a hack writer there, and his publishers come and say, where's your book? And he hasn't done anything. He's already got his advance. He spent his advance. And so he's talking him through it. And then he starts his story, and his best friend's there, and his best friend falls and hits his head in the bathtub, but he gets written into a story. So now he's living the story that he's writing. And Stranger Than Fiction was a movie. It came out several years ago, and movie review said that's Owen Hubbard's Typewriter in the Sky. So that one, that's a fantasy thing there. Probably the one that, if you like psychological thrillers, Fear is the one that Stephen King calls one of the really, really good ones. Inspired several of the major authors to start writing into this genre. That one there is just classic, psychological thriller.
In the Sky and Fear.
And Fear. And then just in terms of military fiction, there's one called Final Blackout. And it's actually even taught in officer training schools. And the main character there is the lieutenant. It's what if World War II didn't stop? It takes place in UK, around London. And it's an amazing treatise on what a real officer is. The lieutenant and what he does to help his guys survive. And it also gives a little bit of Hubbard's view on senior officers back in the safety of command there, that they're more interested in their political aspirations and covering their asses type thing. But that's one that Heinlein said this is the best science fiction ever written. So there you go. I gave you 3 yes before I gave you 3.
That's good. All right.
Yes.
I've got a reading list.
Exactly. So this all said, we've come to the conclusion of our hour, and this was so much. I had so many questions based upon having read that book, and I was just, what's he like here? What about this? What's this character? Just because I like to get into, and it made it very easy for me to have these questions bubble up. I wasn't trying to, okay, now what about this, and what's hidden this? And I was just like, wow, that's really interesting. Just coming of age, and the way he handled the bully was different than how I normally see it in stories. His friend said, don't engage, just, be bigger than him, and that's like good advice to a kid who's suffering being, bullied, but then again, you can also learn judo and take the guy out.
You got to do that. You got to do that sometime.
You can take it out too that way.
Ground, stay down. No way. I'm getting back up.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So for a person to start, I know what you gave me then was that book. So just tell people listening, what would be the book that you recommend that people read to start as an introduction to John Brown?
Okay. Well, I'm going to do kind of like what you did with L. Ron Hubbard. If you like action adventure, you like action thrillers, contemporary action thrillers, stuff like Lee Child or Mission Impossible or something like that, then I would start with Bad Penny and Awful Intent. That's what I would start with. If you like epic fantasy and you want a coming of an age story, I don't know. I'm torn, but you could start with the Drovers. That's the one series, or you could start with Servant in the Dark God series. So, but maybe try Drovers and see what it's like. See what you think.
And that's the only one I know, and that one there I can definitely guarantee. I can promise you, if you start with that one there, you will not be disappointed.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
There you go. Yes. And thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Writers of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We've also been syndicated on the United Public Radio Network, where you can find these podcasts as well. Writers of the Future series can be purchased wherever books are sold in the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, and South Africa, and available everywhere via Amazon.com. We're especially appreciative of our sponsor, Carnation, for supporting this podcast. Carnation was introduced in 1899, and 2024 marked its 125th birthday. So happy birthday, Carnation. You've been making delicious milk products for 1.25 centuries, and you're still going strong. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged for 4 decades. It is free to enter and open to amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Again, thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
One thing that I need, I go call like changing seasons.